The night air was thick with an eerie stillness, and even the wind seemed to hesitate before, whispering through the trees. In the heart of the old mansion, where shadows clung to the walls, like dark secrets, Layla's breath caught as she woke. It wasn't the cold or the nightmare that had jarred her awake, but the whisper, soft yet unmistakable. "You will remember her name." Her heart raced as her eyes fluttered open, but she was no longer in her body. The world was different now. She could feel it in every fiber of her being. The dark past, the violence, the betrayal, and the name she once lived and died by, all were returning, but she was no longer the fragile woman they had erased. Layla's surroundings were unfamiliar, though strangely comforting. The mansion was the same, as she remembered, yet there was something distinctly off about it now. Was it because she knew that she had died once before? Or was it because she was no longer the same woman? She stood up, feeling the weight of the cold marble floor beneath her feet. The darkness seemed to welcome her, as if it had been waiting for her return. The mansion's grand hall, once a prison, now felt like a rebirth, a chance at vengeance, power, and freedom. As she moved through the house, each room seemed to speak to her with memories of things long buried. Memories of the family who had betrayed her, of the man who had turned her life into a weapon, and of the woman they had all forgotten, left behind in the rubble of a life she no longer controlled. Layla's eyes narrowed. She would take back what was hers. This time, the world would remember her name. Layla's name had been a shadow in the halls of her own home, whispered only when no one thought she was listening. The woman they had erased. She had been betrayed, sold, discarded, used. But that was in the past, and the past was no longer relevant. She was reborn now, and this time nothing would stop her. The power she once lacked was growing within her, stronger with each passing moment. Her dark brown eyes, once filled with the fear of an unknown future, now burned with the fire of determination. Her once slender hands were now calloused with purpose, and her frail frame had transformed into something unrecognizable, fierce, unstoppable, and vengeful. But with this new power came new enemies. Those who thought they had left her to die, those who believed she had disappeared, forgotten, would soon feel the weight of her vengeance. There were whispers of a new war brewing in the shadows, one that would shake the foundations of the very society that had once erased her. Layla's mind raced as she recalled the family that had betrayed her, her mother, once her closest confidant, who had sold her for power, her father, a man who had raised her to believe she was nothing more than a pawn, and the man who had once claimed to love her, only to discard her when she became an inconvenience. They had all forgotten her, but that would soon change. The woman they had once tried to erase was coming back, stronger than ever. The flickering candlelight cast shadows across Layla's face as she stood in the study, her reflection twisted in the glass of the large window. A low, raspy voice echoed in her mind, familiar, yet foreign. "They thought you were weak, Layla. They thought they could erase you. But now you have the power to take back everything they took from you." Her breath caught in her throat. The voice wasn't hers. It was deeper, older, almost a warning. "What do I do?" she whispered, not knowing if she was asking herself or the voice that spoke to her from the darkness. "You fight." The voice answered simply, "You make them remember. And when they do, it will be too late." Layla's heart pounded as she stared into the mirror, her reflection a woman she no longer recognized. The face was hers, but the eyes were not. The woman who had been broken was gone, replaced by something much darker, someone who would stop at nothing to rewrite her own fate. The clock struck midnight, and Layla smiled to herself as she felt a new surge of power course through her veins. Her time had come. The world would know her name, and they would never forget it. The air was thick with silence as Layla stepped into the dimly lit courtyard of her childhood home. It had been years since she last set foot here, but the memories were as vivid as the night she had been abandoned. A cold wind swept through the courtyard, carrying with it the faintest echo of her past, a time when she was just a fragile girl, too naive to see the danger, lurking in the shadows. But not anymore. Now, the shadows belonged to her. The courtyard was overgrown, the weeds reclaiming what was once hers. The stone path that led to the mansion's grand entrance was cracked, the grass stubbornly poking through the broken pavement. Layla paused, letting the memories flood her, memories of laughter, betrayal, and the final moment before everything changed. The mansion stood before her, its once grand walls now weathered by time. The ivy that crept up the sides of the building seemed to mock her, as though the house itself had been waiting for her return. The windows were dark, lifeless, but Layla knew better. Beneath the surface, everything still stirred, and everything that had been taken from her would soon be returned. Her mind drifted back to the years she had spent in the mansion, the years when she had been a pawn in her family's games. Her father, a man whose only love was power, had ruled their house with an iron fist. Her mother, once warm and caring, had grown cold with ambition, her loyalty bought by promises of wealth and influence. And then there was Marcus, the man she had once thought would be her savior, the man who had betrayed her in the cruelest way possible. She had been nothing more than a piece in their twisted game, a pawn to be sacrificed when the time was right. And that time had come. Layla clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms as the memories resurfaced. The betrayal, the lies, the final act of abandonment that had sealed her fate. But no more. She turned away from the mansion and walked toward the garden, her footsteps silent against the cracked stone. She felt different now, stronger, more confident. The woman who had once cowered in fear was gone, replaced by someone more dangerous, more determined. She could feel the power stirring within her, a force that was both foreign and familiar. It was as if the very earth beneath her feet was connected to her soul, a force that pulsed with the rhythm of the world itself. She wasn't the woman they had tried to erase. She was someone else now, someone more than they could ever imagine. The power surged again, and Layla's eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight. She was ready to make them all remember. As she walked deeper into the garden, Layla was aware of the presence watching her from the shadows. She wasn't alone. A figure stepped out from behind the trees, tall and imposing. His eyes, cold and calculating, met hers with an unsettling calm. "You're back," he said, his voice low and rough. Layla didn't flinch. "I am," the man smirked. "You think you can undo what's been done? You think they'll remember your name?" "They'll remember," Layla replied, her voice steady and firm. "You should know that better than anyone." The man's smile faded, replaced by a flicker of recognition. He knew who she was. He knew the woman she had once been. But he also knew the danger she now posed. "You've changed," he murmured, his eyes narrowing. Layla took a step closer to him, her eyes locked on his. "I've always been what they made me. But now I'll make them regret ever crossing me." He hesitated, clearly assessing her. "You're playing a dangerous game. You think you can just waltz back into their lives and reclaim everything? They'll never allow it." "I don't need them to allow it," Layla said, her voice hardening. "I'm not asking for permission." There was a tense silence between them, as if the air itself was waiting for the next move. Finally, the man spoke again, this time with a hint of something darker in his voice. "If you're not careful, Layla, you'll become something far worse than the woman they erased. You'll become their nightmare." Layla's lips curled into a smile. "Good. Let them have nightmares." The man turned to leave, his footsteps fading into the night. But Layla stood her ground, her eyes fixed on the mansion ahead. She knew he wasn't the only one who would stand in her way. There were others, those who had been complicit in her fall, those who had helped her disappear. She would bring them all down, one by one. And when the dust settled, she would be the one. standing. The woman they tried to erase would rise again. As Layla turned back toward the mansion, she felt the weight of her mission settle on her shoulders. There was no turning back now. The world would remember her name, or she would make them remember it, no matter the cost. And deep in the heart of the mansion, her family remained unaware of the storm that was about to hit them. They thought she was gone, forgotten. But they were wrong. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow across the sprawling city below. Layla stood atop the mansion's highest balcony, her gaze fixed on the world that had once been her prison. Everything below her seemed small, insignificant, but it was only a matter of time before the very foundations of this city trembled beneath the weight of her revenge. She wasn't here to be forgotten again. She was here to make the world remember who she was and what they had taken from her. Layla's breath was steady, her pulse calm despite the chaos brewing inside her. The wind stirred her hair, but she didn't flinch. She had come to terms with the power that surged inside her, that ancient force of vengeance and justice. She knew deep down that she was no longer the woman who had once cowered in the dark. The woman they had tried to bury was alive again, and her very presence was enough to shake the world. But Layla also knew that power came with a price. Every move she made, every decision would cost her something, perhaps even her own humanity. She couldn't afford to be careless. The world would remember her name, but she had to be careful not to become a monster in the process. She turned, eyes scanning the courtyard below. From this height, she could see the entire property, the house she had once called home. The garden that she had walked through just moments ago was now a place of memories, and every room in the house seemed to whisper her name. But the mansion wasn't the only thing on her mind. There was someone else to consider, someone who had been watching her. The man from earlier. Who was he? As if summoned by her thoughts, a figure stepped out from the shadows of the courtyard. Layla's eyes narrowed as she recognized him. The same man who had confronted her earlier. His tall, imposing frame cast a long shadow across the ground, and his expression was unreadable. "I thought you'd be waiting for me," Layla said, her voice cool and steady as she turned to face him. He tilted his head slightly, his eyes studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "I never expected you to return," he replied, his voice low, almost regretful. "I didn't think you had it in you." "I didn't have a choice," Layla answered, her tone darkening. "And neither do you." The man took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. "I'm not here to stop you, Layla. I'm here to warn you. You're playing with fire." "I've been burned before," she retorted, her voice growing colder. "And I didn't die." The man's expression softened, but there was something dangerous in his gaze. "You're not the only one who's been wronged. There are others. People who've lost as much as you, and they've been waiting for someone like you to return." Layla arched an eyebrow. "What are you suggesting?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. "Join us. We can help each other. We can bring down the ones who betrayed us, together." Her heart raced, but she didn't show it. She had always been a loner, trusting no one, but something about the man's words resonated with her. Perhaps it was the promise of power, the idea of finally having an ally in a world that had forsaken her. "I work alone," Layla said, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. He smiled, a glint of amusement flickering in his eyes. "You're lying to yourself, Layla. You're not as strong as you think you are. But with us, you could be unstoppable." The offer hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Layla considered it. Could she trust him? Could she afford to work with someone who had his own agenda? But before she could answer, a sharp voice interrupted them from the shadows. "Is this what you've become?" Layla's gaze snapped to the newcomer. Standing in the doorway of the mansion was a figure she recognized all too well, Marcus. Her heart sank and anger flared in her chest. The man who had once claimed to love her, the one who had betrayed her so brutally, was standing before her once again. "I told you," he sneered, his voice thick with disdain. "You're nothing but a ghost. And now? You've come back, thinking you can take what's mine." Layla's hands clenched into fists, her body trembling with rage. She wanted to rip him apart, to make him feel the pain she had endured all those years ago. But she held herself in check. The time for vengeance had come, but she needed to be smarter than this. "Leave, Marcus," she said, her voice cold, calculating. "This is between me and them. It has nothing to do with you anymore. Is that so?" He took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. "You really think you can just waltz in here and take what you want without consequences?" "I've already faced the consequences," Layla replied, her tone icy. "And I'm still standing." Marcus's gaze flickered to the man beside her, the one who had been watching from the shadows. "So you found a new ally." How quaint. The tension in the air thickened, and Layla knew this was the moment. The moment everything would either fall into place or spiral out of control. She turned to the man beside her. "What do you want me to do?" The man's eyes never left Marcus as he replied, "Make your move." And in that instant, Layla made a decision. She stepped forward, her eyes locked on Marcus as she raised her hand. The air around her seemed to crackle with energy, the power coursing through her veins like a living thing. Marcus's eyes widened in shock, but it was too late. Layla's voice rang out, filled with authority. "You'll remember my name, Marcus. And when you do, it'll be your last." The crack of thunder echoed in the distance as Layla's power surged, the air growing heavy with tension. And then, everything went black. The world was silent when Layla awoke, but the silence felt different this time. It wasn't peaceful, it was suffocating. As she blinked open her eyes, she found herself no longer standing in the garden, nor on the balcony overlooking the city. She was in a dark room, the kind of darkness that seeped into her bones and twisted her thoughts. What had happened? How had she gotten here? The events from the night before were a blur. One moment she had confronted Marcus. The next everything had gone black. Had she lost control, or had someone else interfered? Layla's fingers twitched as she pushed herself up, the cold stone floor pressing against her. Palms. Her body was sore, her head pounding as though someone had struck her with a blunt object. She rubbed her temples, trying to clear the fog clouding her thoughts. Her surroundings were unfamiliar. Stone walls, a single window high above her head, casting a sliver of moonlight into the room. The air smelled musty, damp, like a place that had been abandoned for years. She wasn't alone. A figure stood in the corner, watching her with calm eyes. His presence was unsettling, yet familiar. "You're awake," the figure said, his voice low, but it carried authority. Layla's gaze shifted to him, recognizing the man who had spoken to her earlier, the one who had offered an alliance. "What happened?" Layla's voice was hoarse, as though she hadn't spoken in days. He stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "You're safe, for now. But you need to understand something, Layla. Things are moving faster than you realize. There are others who want to use your power, and there are those who will stop at nothing to ensure you're erased." Once again, the man's face softened slightly, his eyes narrowing with concern. "You've made enemies, Layla. Powerful enemies. And they won't just let you walk away." Layla's chest tightened as she pushed herself to her feet, her body unsteady. "I know who they are. They think they can control me. They think they can break me." He tilted his head, studying her. "And do you think you can control this power? Because I can. Tell you right now, it's not something you can just harness without consequences." Layla's eyes narrowed as she took a step toward him, her voice a whisper of menace. "What?" "Your name?" The man hesitated, then spoke. "I'm Kieran. I know you're angry, but your rage will blind you if you're not careful." Kieran's words hung in the air like a warning. Layla's mind was a storm, swirling with thoughts of revenge, of the betrayal she had suffered, and of the people who had wronged her. She had always been powerless, always at the mercy of others. But now she had the power to destroy them all. She clenched her fists, feeling the power stir within her once again, raw, untamed, and uncontrollable. It was tempting to let it all out, to take vengeance without mercy. But Kieran's words made her pause. Could she really control it? "Why do you want to help me?" Layla asked, her voice steady despite the chaos inside her. "What's in this for you?" Kieran's gaze remained unwavering. "I'm not here to help you for nothing. There's a greater plan, Layla. You may not see it yet, but if we work together, we can bring down those who think they control this world. And if I don't trust you," Layla countered. Kieran smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. "Then you'll be alone, and they will come for you, one by one." Layla stepped closer, her resolve hardening. She wasn't here to be controlled anymore. She wasn't here to be anyone's pawn. But Kieran was right. She needed allies. "I won't be alone," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "But this war isn't just about revenge. It's about taking back what's mine, everything they stole from me." Kieran nodded slowly, understanding flickering in his eyes. "Then you're ready. The war has already begun, Layla. And the first battle starts with you." Layla's gaze drifted to the small window, where the sliver of moonlight cast shadows across the stone walls. A thought flashed in her mind. This wasn't just about vengeance. It was about exposing the truth about everything, about her family, about Marcus, about the dark forces pulling the strings behind the scenes. The deeper she dug, the more she realized that her family wasn't just wealthy, they were deeply connected to a much larger, more dangerous network. The power they wielded was older than she could have ever imagined, rooted in dark secrets that spanned generations. And Marcus? He was a puppet, just like her, but with far less to lose. Layla needed to pull at the threads, unravel the lies, and expose them all for what they truly were. "I know where we need to go," Kieran said, interrupting her thoughts. "There's a place where we can start. A place where the answers lie." Layla turned toward him, her eyes narrowed with determination. "Lead the way." Kieran hesitated for a moment, as though he were weighing the decision, then nodded. "It's not going to be easy, but we'll have to move quickly. They're already looking for you." "I don't fear them," Layla replied, her voice firm. "Let them come." As Kieran led Layla through the dark, narrow corridors of the hidden place, she felt a sense of urgency rise within her. She knew this was just the beginning. The people who had wronged her, who had betrayed her, were going to feel her wrath. But she also knew that the path ahead was dangerous, and there was no turning back. She had made her choice, and now the world would remember her name. The night had fallen thick and heavy around them, but Layla felt the energy in the air shift. It was electric, charged with anticipation and danger. Her pulse quickened as they moved deeper into the heart of the city. She had crossed a line, one she couldn't uncross, and the consequences of her actions were beginning to unfold. But she wasn't afraid. If anything, the danger exhilarated her. The world had tried to erase her, but it was about to learn that she was not easily forgotten. The streets of the city were alive with the hum of distant traffic, the occasional screech of tires on wet pavement, and the soft rustle of leaves in the trees that lined the narrow alleys. But Layla barely noticed. She was focused on the path ahead. Kieran had led her to a forgotten part of the city, a place that seemed to have been abandoned by time itself. The buildings here were old, their walls crumbling and covered with graffiti, windows shattered or boarded up. But there was a haunting beauty to it. This was the part of the city where secrets were kept, where whispers echoed in the shadows, and where powerful people made deals that no one else could know about. The abandoned warehouse loomed in front of them, its iron gates rusted, the structure seeming to sway in the wind, as if it were about to collapse. "This is it," Kieran said, his voice low but urgent. "Inside, you'll find what you're looking for." Layla studied the building, her eyes narrowing. She could feel the weight of it, the hidden truths, the lies that had been buried for years. This place was more than just a warehouse. It was a vault. A vault of secrets. She turned to Kieran. "What's inside?" "A council," Kieran said, a flicker of hesitation crossing his face. "A group of people who control more than just the city. They have their hands in everything, business, politics, and even you." Layla's eyes flashed with recognition. "You mean they were the ones who—" Kieran nodded grimly. "They were the ones who erased you, Layla. And they won't stop until you're gone for good." Layla's mind raced, but she kept her composure. The pieces were finally falling into place. This was no longer just about revenge against Marcus or her family. It was about uncovering the dark force behind her downfall. As they moved through the warehouse, the air grew thick, the stench of mold and decay making Layla's stomach churn. Yet, there was an unmistakable sense of purpose within her, a clarity that she hadn't felt before. The closer they got to the center of this web, the clearer the path ahead became. The door to the main chamber was heavy, its metal frame screeching as Kieran pushed it open. Inside, the room was dimly lit, the only light coming from a single chandelier hanging from the ceiling. Around the room, 6 figures sat at a long table, their faces obscured in the shadows. "We've been expecting you," one of the figures said, their voice muffled but clear. "We were wondering how long it would take for you to find your way here." Layla stepped forward, her eyes blazing with fire. "I'm here because of what you did to me, to my family, to everything I had. And I won't leave until you understand what that's cost you." The figure at the head of the table laughed, a deep, hollow sound that echoed through the room. "You think you're the first to come after us? You think your little vendetta will make a difference?" "Your mistake was thinking I was weak," Layla replied, her voice steady, unshaken by their taunts. "But I'm not. And I'm not afraid of you either." One of the figures leaned forward, their eyes glinting in the low light. "You don't understand the world you've stepped into, Layla. This is bigger than you, bigger than your petty revenge." "Petty?" Layla's voice was a low growl, her anger rising. "You erased me. You destroyed my life. That's not petty. That's a war." The room fell silent, the figures exchanging uneasy glances. Kieran remained at her side, a silent support, as Layla faced the council. The figure at the head of the table spoke again, their voice chilling. "You may have power, Layla, but it's nothing compared to ours. We control everything. Your revenge ends here." Layla's hands clenched into fists, the power inside her stirring once again. "I'm not here for revenge anymore. I'm here to take back what's mine, all of it, and I'll burn every last one of you down if that's what it takes." Another figure, this one a woman, stood up slowly, her gaze piercing. "You think you can challenge us? You're just a shadow in the grand scheme of things." Layla's eyes flashed with fury. "Maybe, but shadows can burn too." With that, the room erupted. The council members moved swiftly, but Layla was faster. She could feel the surge of power within her, a force that flowed through her veins like fire. Her body moved with precision as she tapped into her newfound strength. Each gesture was deliberate, every step calculated. The council's confidence wavered as Layla's power began to manifest in the room, crackling through the air. One by one they stood, eyes wide with shock and fear as they realized the woman they thought they had erased was no longer a victim. She was a force to be reckoned with. Kieran watched from the side, his expression unreadable. Layla had crossed the line, but there was no turning back now. She was going to burn this entire city down, starting with the people who thought they owned it. As the room began to tremble with Layla's power, she turned toward the figure at the head of the table, the one who had spoken first. Her eyes locked onto his with a fire that could not be quenched. "Now," she whispered, her voice a low, deadly promise. "You'll remember my name." The council's leader opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came. The world around them was spinning, the room blurring in and out of focus as Layla's power grew. And in that moment, Layla knew that everything was about to change. The echoes of the collapsing building reverberated through the alleyway, but Layla didn't flinch. The room had been reduced to rubble in seconds, but she stood tall amidst the wreckage, her body still humming with raw energy. Her power was like a fire, consuming everything in its path, and for the first time, she felt fully in control. The council members had underestimated her, thinking they could break her, control her, but they were wrong. Now, they would understand what it meant to cross her. Dust settled in the air like fog, drifting around Layla as she surveyed the destruction she had caused. The once imposing council chamber was now nothing more than a pile of twisted metal, broken stone, and shattered glass. The members of the council lay scattered across the floor, unconscious but alive. Layla's eyes swept over the carnage, and for a brief moment, she hesitated. She had done what she needed to do, but the aftermath felt strange, almost empty. There was no satisfaction in their defeat, no relief. Instead, there was only the cold, relentless awareness that the war she had started was only just beginning. Kieran stepped forward, his expression unreadable as he took in the scene. "You did it," he said, his voice low and almost cautious. "But this isn't over. It's only the beginning." Layla nodded, her gaze fixed on the shattered remnants of the council. "I know. They won't stop. And neither will I." The air felt thick with tension as Layla turned away from the wreckage. She wasn't sure where to go next, but the path ahead was clear. The council had been only one piece of the puzzle, and now that piece had been destroyed. But there were others, more powerful figures, more intricate webs of deceit. "We need to go," Kieran said, his voice urgent. "Before they send reinforcements, there's still more to be done." Layla didn't need to be told twice. She followed Kieran, her mind racing with the implications of what had just happened. The destruction she had caused, the chaos, had been necessary, but it had opened doors to a far more dangerous world than she had anticipated. There were those who wouldn't be so easily intimidated. The real power behind the council was still out there, and they would stop at nothing to ensure she never rose again. But Layla wasn't just going to survive, she was going to make them pay. As they exited the building, Layla's thoughts shifted to the bigger picture. The council had been the starting point, but now she had a taste of the power that coursed through her veins. It was like an addiction, a thirst that could never be quenched. She knew she had to use this power carefully. There was a fine line between being a force of change and becoming the very monster she had fought against. "We have to find out who's behind all this," Layla said, her voice steady. "The ones who made me what I am. The ones who erased me." Kieran glanced at her, his eyes softening with understanding. "You're not alone in this, Layla. But be careful. The more you dig, the more dangerous it becomes. There are people who will want you gone. People with power that you can't even imagine." Layla's jaw tightened as she pushed forward, her pace quickening. "I've already lost everything. There's nothing left to take from me." They arrived at a small, inconspicuous building on the edge of the city. It was nothing more than an old bookshop, but Layla knew it was far more than it appeared. This was where Kieran had been leading her. Inside, the walls were lined with books, but the air was heavy with secrets. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with sharp, calculating eyes, looked up as they entered. He nodded slightly, as if expecting them. "You've come for the next step," the man said, his voice quiet but filled with authority. Layla didn't speak, she simply nodded. Kieran had mentioned this man, someone who knew the undercurrents of power in the city. Someone who could help her navigate the web of deceit that entangled her life. The man gestured for them to follow him to the back of the shop. where a small door opened to reveal a hidden staircase leading down into the earth. The air grew cooler as they descended into what appeared to be a hidden chamber, its walls lined with ancient artifacts and documents. "This is where it all begins," the man said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The information you seek is here, Layla. But beware, the truth is a dangerous weapon." Layla felt a chill run down her spine. She knew the stakes were higher now than they had ever been before. The room was dimly lit by flickering candles, and the musty smell of old paper filled the air. The shopkeeper pulled a large leather-bound book from a shelf and laid it on the table in front of her. "This," he said, "is the history of the council, but it's more than that. It's the history of the people who control this city, those who shaped the world you once lived in, and those who erased you." Layla opened the book, her fingers trembling slightly as she turned the pages. It was filled with names, dates, and references to powerful families, politicians, and figures who controlled the city from behind the scenes. And in the margins, there were notations in a code that only someone who understood the game could decipher. As she scanned the pages, one name caught her eye. Her breath caught in her throat as she read the words that were written there. "Marcus. Marcus is one of them," Layla whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. "He's been a part of this all along." The shopkeeper nodded grimly. "Yes, he was a puppet in their game just like you were, but you're different now. You know the truth. And now that you have it, you have the power to change things." Layla slammed the book shut, her heart pounding in her chest. "I will. But first, I need to make them pay for what they've done." The sound of footsteps echoed from above, and Layla's hand instinctively went to her side, where the knife she had taken from the council lay hidden. Kieran's eyes flicked toward the stairs, his expression hardening. "They know we're here," he said quietly. "It's time to go." But Layla wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. She turned to the shopkeeper, her gaze burning with determination. "I'm not leaving until I know everything. The council may be gone, but their legacy isn't." The man's lips curled into a faint smile. "Then you're more ready than I thought." The streets were darker than they should have been, as if the very city had grown tired of the lies that had festered within it. Layla moved through the shadows, her steps light but purposeful, her mind racing with the weight of the secrets she had uncovered. The truth was now in her hands, and it had set off a chain reaction that could not be stopped. But as she turned down yet another narrow alley, a flicker of movement caught her eye. She wasn't alone. Someone was watching her. Layla slowed her pace, her senses sharpening as the adrenaline coursed through her veins. The flickering streetlights above cast long shadows on the cracked pavement beneath her feet. She had learned to trust her instincts, and right now, every bone in her body screamed that danger was near. The city, once familiar and comforting, now felt like a labyrinth of threats, closing in on her from every direction. She glanced over her shoulder, but the alley behind her was empty. At least, it seemed so. The hairs on the back of her neck prickled as she quickened her pace. It was subtle at first, the sensation of being followed, but it grew stronger with every step. Her fingers brushed the handle of the knife at her side, her grip firm as she prepared herself. She wasn't about to let anyone catch her off guard again. A shadow darted across her path, and in an instant, Layla was on high alert. She didn't hesitate. She spun around, eyes locked on the figure that had just emerged from the darkness. A tall man, his features obscured by the shadows, stepped into the dim light. He was dressed in all black, his face partially hidden by the collar of his coat. "Who are you?" Layla demanded, her voice sharp, every muscle tensed. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a step closer, his presence almost suffocating. His eyes were cold, calculating, but there was something else beneath them. Something familiar. "I'm not here to hurt you," the man said, his voice low and steady. Layla didn't lower the knife. "Then what do you want?" He smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was a grin that hinted at too many secrets. "I want to help you. Help you finish what you started. Layla's mind raced. This was no coincidence. This man was part of the same world she had just begun to uncover, but whether he was an ally or another enemy was still unclear. Help me? Layla scoffed. I've had enough of people claiming they want to help me. Who are you working for? The man didn't flinch, his eyes never leaving hers. I work for myself, but I know who you're up against. And you're in over your head. The council was just the beginning. Layla lowered the knife slightly, but her suspicion didn't wane. The council? I've already taken care of them. He shook his head. You don't understand. There are other forces at play, forces that have far more power than the council ever did. And they won't stop until you're gone. What are you talking about? Layla's heart began to pound. She had thought the council was the final piece of the puzzle, the ones who had orchestrated everything from the shadows. But now, this man was suggesting something even darker, something more dangerous. You've just scratched the surface, he replied. I can show you the rest, but only if you trust me. Layla studied him for a long moment, weighing her options. She had never been one to trust easily, especially after everything that had happened. But something about this man felt different. He wasn't like the others. Why should I trust you? Layla finally asked, her voice low and cautious. Because you don't have a choice, the man said, his voice like steel. You're already in the game. The only question is how you're going to play it. The silence between them was thick, Layla's mind running through every possible outcome. She could continue to play this dangerous game on her own, using the power she had unlocked to tear down everyone who had wronged her, or she could take this man's offer and learn more about the true forces behind her downfall. The decision was hard, but it was clear. She had to know the truth. She had to uncover every last piece of this web. Fine, she said, her voice steady but filled with resolve. Show me. The man gave a slight nod and motioned for her to follow him. Without a word, she fell into step. Behind him, the city around them growing quieter with every turn they took. They walked in silence for what felt like hours, weaving through dark alleyways and deserted streets, until they reached an unmarked door at the end of a forgotten street. The man pressed, his palm against a hidden sensor, and the door clicked open. Layla stepped inside, immediately feeling the temperature drop. The room beyond was stark, cold and clinical, like something straight out of a spy thriller. The walls were lined with monitors and flickering screens, and at the center of the room sat a long, polished table. Several people were already seated at it, their faces shrouded in shadow. This is the network, the man said, his tone serious. The people who control everything you've been fighting against. They're the real players in this game, and they won't rest until you're erased for good. Layla's eyes scanned the room, her mind racing with questions. What exactly do they want? From me? The man took a seat at the table, gesturing for her to join him. They want your power, and they'll stop at nothing to get it. As Layla sat down, the other figures in the room remained silent, their eyes flickering to her but saying nothing. The weight of their presence was almost suffocating, and for the first time since she had begun this journey, Layla felt truly out of her depth. The man who had led her here leaned forward. You've been living in the shadows, Layla, but the time for hiding is over. If you want to take down the people who have destroyed your life, you have to learn how to use the system against them. Layla's hands clenched into fists. How do I do that? He smiled, a cold glint in his eyes. By becoming one of them. The room fell silent again, the weight of the man's words settling in the air between them. Layla's heart pounded as she considered his offer. Could she really do what he was suggesting? Could she infiltrate the very system that had tried to break her? She knew the answer, but she wasn't ready to say it just yet. As the room continued to hum with tension, Layla realized one thing. The war wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about taking control of her own fate. And she was ready to take it. The air was thick with the smell of burnt rubber and old secrets. Layla's heart raced as she sat in the cold, dimly lit room, the hum of machinery around her making the tension almost unbearable. She had made her choice. There was no turning back now, but as she stared at the monitor before her, watching the encrypted files flicker with cryptic messages and shadowed figures, she couldn't help but wonder, was she becoming the very thing she hated? The walls seemed to close in, and for the first time in months, she questioned the true cost of this war she had started. The hidden network that had taken her in was as cold and calculated as the people who ran it. The room she sat in was buried deep beneath the city, a fortress of technology and secrecy. Monitors blinked, casting an eerie glow on the steel walls. The sound of typing echoed through the silence as the man who had brought her here, Kieran, worked beside her, his fingers flying over the keys, accessing files that were far beyond her comprehension. Layla leaned forward, watching as Kieran navigated through the encrypted files. The tension was palpable. They were close now, closer than ever to discovering the true power behind the forces that had controlled her life. But each click of the keyboard seemed to bring a deeper understanding of the danger that lay ahead. "You sure you're ready for this?" Kieran's voice broke the silence, his eyes flicking over to her. Layla didn't look away from the screen. "I'm not here to play games anymore. I want the truth. I want to know who did this to me." Kieran nodded grimly. "Then prepare yourself. What we're about to uncover goes deeper than anything you can imagine." The file finally opened, revealing a series of complex documents, names and financial records that stretched for pages. Layla's eyes scanned them quickly, her mind racing as she tried to piece together the puzzle. There were familiar names, corporations, politicians, and people she had once trusted. But then there were new names, ones she didn't recognize, tied to shadowy organizations with connections that ran deeper than she had anticipated. "This is more than just the council," Layla murmured under her breath, the weight of the discovery sinking in. "This is global." Kieran's fingers hovered over the keyboard, his expression unreadable. "This is just the beginning. These files are part of something much larger, a syndicate of elites who have been pulling the strings for decades. They control everything from the media to the economy, the military to the underground networks." Layla's heart pounded as the implications of his words sank in. The council had been the tip of the iceberg. The people behind her downfall weren't just local power players, they were part of a global network, a hidden empire that controlled everything she had ever known. "But why me?" she asked, her voice strained with disbelief. "What do they want from me?" Kieran leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing as he processed her question. "You're the key, Layla. Your bloodline, your power. You were meant to be a part of this world. But they didn't count on you rejecting it. They didn't count on you surviving." Layla's mind raced as she processed his words. The power inside her, the one that had started as a flicker and had grown to an uncontrollable force, wasn't just a weapon, it was a part of something bigger, a legacy, a hidden potential she had barely begun to understand. "You're not just fighting for revenge anymore," Kieran continued, his voice almost reverent. "You're fighting to control your own destiny, to take back everything they've stolen from you." Layla's hands clenched into fists, the power inside her swirling like a storm just beneath the surface. She had always known she was different, but now she understood just how deep that difference ran. She wasn't just a survivor, she was a threat. "Then it's time to make them see who I really am," she said, her voice steady with resolve. "I won't be their pawn. I'll be their worst nightmare." Kieran looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Be careful, Layla. This isn't just a fight for control. It's a fight for your soul." Layla didn't flinch. "My soul was never theirs to begin with." With that, she turned back to the screen, her eyes now burning with a clarity that had eluded her before. The files on the screen were more than just names and documents. They were a map, an intricate web of power that stretched across continents, each thread leading back to the people who had wronged her. She knew what she had to do next. It wasn't just about taking down the council anymore. It was about dismantling the entire system. The people who had controlled her life were just the first domino. Now she was ready to knock them all down. But as Layla prepared to take the next step, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking down a path that would change her forever. The power within her, untamed, chaotic, and all-consuming, was a double-edged sword. It had given her the strength to fight back, but at what cost? She wasn't sure anymore. She had always thought revenge would be enough to fill the emptiness inside her. But now, as she looked at the files, at the vast network of control, she realized that her fight was no longer just about personal vengeance. It was about rewriting the rules of the world. It was about making sure no one ever had the power to erase her or anyone else ever again. But the more she uncovered, the more she questioned what that would cost her. Could she really control this power without losing herself? Could she make the world remember her name without becoming the very thing she sought to destroy? As Layla's mind raced with these questions, a sudden noise cut through the silence. Someone was approaching. Her hand instinctively reached for the knife at her side, her muscles tensing, ready for whatever came next. Kieran's eyes flicked to the door. "We're not alone." Before she could respond, the door to the room opened with a soft creak, and a shadowed figure stepped inside. Layla's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the figure standing before her. It was Marcus. He stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable, but his eyes were filled with a mix of anger and something else, something darker. "You've made a mistake, Layla," he said, his voice cold. Layla didn't flinch. "I don't make mistakes. I make choices." Marcus stepped forward, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. "You've just signed your own death warrant." The silence between them was thick, the air charged with an electric tension. Layla's eyes never left Marcus as he stepped forward, the shadows seeming to cling to him as though they recognized the darkness within him. He had always been a part of her life, first as the man she thought she could trust, then as the one who had shattered everything she knew. Now he was here, in the very heart of her war, against the world that had betrayed her. "You're too late, Marcus," Layla said, her voice calm despite the storm swirling within her. "The world is already changing." The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from the flickering screens around them. Layla could hear the hum of the machines behind her, but none of it mattered. Everything outside this moment had faded into the background. It was just her and Marcus now. He stepped closer, his presence dominating the small space. There was a coldness in his eyes, familiar, yet somehow different from the man she had once known. The years of manipulation and betrayal had molded him into something darker, more dangerous. Layla stood tall, unyielding, as she faced him. The power inside her was no longer a question. It was who she was now. She could feel the surge of it, pressing against her skin like an unspoken promise. "I don't need to explain myself to you, Marcus," she said, her voice unwavering. "You should have known what was coming." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You think you've won? You think you're in control? Now? You're still just a tool, Layla, no matter how much power you think you have." Layla's heart raced, but her face remained cold, her eyes locked on his. "If I'm a tool," she said, slowly, "then I'm the sharpest one in the box. You underestimated me. You all did." Marcus took a step closer, his voice lowering as he spoke. "You really think this is about power, don't you? You're just a puppet in their game, just like I was. The only difference is you're too blind to see that you're being used." Layla's fingers clenched into fists, her nails digging into her palms. "You think I'm being used? You're the one who's still a pawn, Marcus. You always were. You never had the guts to break free, but I did." His gaze flickered with something, anger, fear, perhaps even regret. but it was quickly masked by his usual bravado. "You don't get it, Layla. You can't fight them. You can't take them down. They've been in control for centuries. They will crush you, just like they crushed me." Layla's voice was cold, cutting through the air like a knife. "You're wrong. They've already lost." There was a pause, the weight of his words sinking in. Layla's mind flashed back to the years of manipulation, the lies and the broken promises. It had all led to this moment, the moment she finally understood why he had betrayed her. "You didn't think it was just about you and me, did you?" Marcus continued, his voice almost a whisper. "This has always been bigger than that. It's about control, it's about power, and you've always been a part of their plan, even if you didn't know it." Layla felt a chill crawl down her spine as the realization hit her. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice shaking with a mix of disbelief and fury. Marcus's lips curled into a bitter smile. "You were never meant to be the leader, Layla. You were always meant to be a tool, a weapon, just like me. They used us both. They knew you would survive, knew you would come back for revenge. They've been watching us the whole time." Her mind reeled as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The council, the hidden network, the power she had unlocked. It was all part of a much larger scheme. They had known she would come for them. They had been waiting for it. "You think I'm just a pawn in their game?" Layla's voice was barely a whisper. "Then why didn't they kill me when they had the chance? Why let me live, let me come back, only to find out what they've done?" Marcus's expression flickered. "Because they needed you, and now they'll use your power to do what they couldn't do before." A rush of adrenaline surged through Layla as the last piece of the puzzle clicked into place. "You were never meant to be my ally, Marcus," she said, her voice ice cold. "You were just another pawn. Another one of their puppets." His face twisted with rage, and for a brief moment, Layla saw the man he once was, the one who had betrayed her, who had once claimed to love her. But that man was gone, replaced by someone darker, someone who had long since abandoned any hope of redemption. "I should have killed you when I had the chance," he spat, taking a step forward. Layla stood her ground. "Try it." The air between them crackled with tension, the very ground beneath their feet seeming to tremble. Layla could feel the power inside her, surging and ready to explode, but she knew this wasn't the time. The real battle wasn't just about the physical confrontation between her and Marcus. It was about taking down the forces that had controlled them both, the ones who had used them as pawns in their game of power. "You've made a mistake," Marcus said, his voice low and threatening. "You don't understand the game you're playing. You don't know what they'll do when they come for you." Layla's eyes narrowed, her voice a deadly whisper. "I already know. And when they come, I'll be ready." As Marcus turned and began to walk away, Layla's gaze followed him, a silent promise burning in her chest. The time for games was over. The war was far from finished, and Layla had only just begun. She knew the path ahead would be treacherous, but she was done playing by their rules. She had learned too much. The pieces were all in place. Now it was time to make her move. The world would remember her name, and it would never forget. The city's skyline shimmered in the distance, bathed in the cold light of the moon. Layla stood on the rooftop of an abandoned building, looking out over the vast expanse before her. The world stretched out beneath her, but the weight of what she was about to do settled heavily on her shoulders. It had all led to this moment. She had walked through darkness, faced betrayal, and uncovered secrets that were never meant to be revealed. Now the final confrontation was at hand, and she had no choice but to push forward. But the question lingered in her mind as she stared at the city below. Was she truly ready to become the person she had to be to end this? The night was quiet, save for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional whisper of wind against the crumbling buildings. Layla could feel the cool breeze against her skin, the chill cutting through her clothes, but it didn't matter. She had grown used to the cold over the years. The isolation, the loneliness. Now, though, there was something else. She wasn't alone anymore. Kieran's voice broke the silence as he approached from behind, his footsteps light on the roof's cracked surface. He stopped beside her, his eyes scanning the city as she had done moments before. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Layla didn't answer immediately. She was already deep in thought, her mind racing with the plan they had laid out. This was it. The final phase, the endgame. The people who had destroyed her life, the ones who had made her a pawn in their game of power, would finally pay for their actions. But the cost of what she was about to do was more than just physical. It was a battle for her very soul. "There's no other choice," she replied quietly, her gaze still fixed on the horizon. "The people, behind everything, behind my pain, my suffering, they'll never stop. I have to stop them, once and for all." Kieran remained silent for a moment before speaking again, his voice low. "You know there's no going back, right? Once you strike, there's no unmaking what's been done." Layla's eyes flickered to him. "I'm not afraid anymore. I've already lost everything. This is the only way." The truth hung in the air between them. Layla had spent so many years running, hiding, waiting for the right moment to strike back at the people who had wronged her. She had endured the betrayal of those she loved, had been forced into a life she never wanted, but now she had control. Now she was the one making the choices, and she wasn't afraid of what came next. Kieran studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Just remember, Layla, the line between justice and vengeance is thin. The further you walk down this path, the harder it becomes to tell the difference." She nodded, accepting the truth in his words. But it didn't matter anymore. The damage had been done long ago, and she was past the point of caring about the difference between justice and vengeance. All she cared about now was the end of the game. She was done being controlled. It was time to take back everything. The plan was simple: strike hard, strike fast. There was a place beneath the city where the final players in this war, the ones who had been pulling the strings all along, held their meetings. A hidden underground facility where the people who controlled the fate of millions met in secret. Layla knew it wouldn't be easy. She was no longer the woman who had been too weak to stand up for herself. She had become something else, something powerful. But she also knew that, even with all the power she had at her disposal, she wasn't invincible. There would be a price to pay for what she was about to do. They moved swiftly through the streets, avoiding the patrols and the watchful eyes of the network's operatives. The facility was near, and Layla could already feel the weight of the confrontation pressing down on her. Every step brought her closer to the end of the line, closer to the people who had destroyed her life. As they neared the entrance to the underground facility, a familiar voice suddenly stopped her in her tracks. "Did you think you could really get away with this?" Marcus's voice echoed from behind her. Layla turned, her heart pounding. He had found her again. Marcus stood in the shadows, his face half hidden by the hood of his coat. His expression was unreadable, but there was a coldness in his eyes that made her skin crawl. "You've come so far, Layla. But you still don't understand the game you're playing." "What game is that?" Layla demanded, her voice hard. "I'm not playing anymore. This ends tonight." Marcus took a step forward, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "You think you're going to walk in there and destroy everything they've built? You think you can change the world on your own? You've been a part of this game from the beginning, Layla. You've always been a pawn." Her pulse quickened, but her voice remained steady. "I'm not a pawn anymore, and I'm not playing by your rules." He smiled, but it was bitter and empty. "You don't get it. You're still just like me, no matter how much power you have, you'll always be a part of the system. You'll always be their tool." Layla felt a surge of anger, but she knew better than to let it control her. "I'm not you, Marcus, and I'm not letting you or anyone else control me." Marcus's expression hardened. "You'll regret this, Layla. You'll see. The path you're choosing, it will consume you." He turned to leave, but Layla called out to him. "Marcus!" He paused, glancing back over his shoulder. Layla took a deep breath, her voice steady as she spoke. "You were never the one I should have trusted," she said, the words more final than she had intended. "You were always just another player in their game." He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes flickering with something. Anger, maybe regret. Then, without another word, he disappeared into the shadows. Layla turned back to the facility, her heart heavy but resolute. The storm had been gathering for years, and now it was time for it to break. She and Kieran moved quickly into the facility, the final confrontation drawing near. The doors to the underground facility opened before them with a hiss, revealing the dark, metallic halls beyond. Layla's footsteps were steady as she walked through the corridors, the sound of her boots echoing in the silence. She had come here for one reason: to end it all. The people who had destroyed her life, the ones who had used her as a pawn in their game, would never control her again. As Layla stepped into the heart of the facility, a figure stepped out of the shadows. She froze. It was the leader of the network, the one who had been pulling the strings all along. "Welcome, Layla," the figure said, their voice smooth and confident. "I've been waiting for you." Layla stood face to face with the leader of the network, the man who had orchestrated everything. His cold eyes watched her with calculating detachment, and she could almost feel the weight of his gaze like an invisible hand pressing against her chest. "You've come a long way, Layla," the leader said, his voice smooth, almost pleasant. "But now, it's over. You're too late." Layla's lips curled into a bitter smile. "I'm never too late." The room was vast, illuminated by the harsh glow of overhead lights. The walls were lined with monitors and control panels, each displaying encrypted information, names, and figures that meant nothing to Layla anymore. This wasn't about power or information, it was about ending the cycle of manipulation that had plagued her life for so long. The leader stood at the far end of the room, his posture relaxed, but exuding an aura of absolute control. He looked almost serene, as though he had anticipated her arrival all along. Layla could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating, as if the room itself were waiting for something to break. "You really think you can destroy everything we've built?" the leader continued, his voice soft but piercing. "We've been in control for generations. What makes you think you can change that?" Layla's eyes never left his, her grip tightening on the knife hidden at her side. She was calm, but inside, the fire burned brighter than ever. She had come too far to turn back now. "You've controlled everything, all right, but you forgot one thing. You forgot me." The leader's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of something, fear, maybe, passing across his face before it was replaced by a cool, composed mask. "You've been a problem, Layla, but not an insurmountable one. You've made it difficult, yes, but this is where it ends." Layla stepped forward, her every move calculated, every muscle in her body taut with anticipation. "You're wrong. This isn't where it ends. This is where it begins." She could feel the power inside her, coursing through her veins, a force she could no longer ignore. She had always known she was different, but now she understood the true extent of her strength. The leader, the council, the network, they had all underestimated her. But Layla was more than a pawn in their game. She was the storm they had failed to predict. As she took another step forward, the leader's eyes flashed with something dangerous. He raised a hand, and a soft beep echoed from the far side of the room. The monitors flickered, and, suddenly, Layla was no longer alone. From the shadows, several armed men appeared, their weapons trained on her. They were fast, efficient. But Layla had already anticipated this. She could feel the pressure building, the power within her stirring like a volcano about to erupt. "Get ready." Kieran's voice came from the earpiece she wore, his voice steady despite the chaos. "I've got your back, but this one is on you." Layla didn't need to look to know that Kieran was already in position, preparing for his own part of the plan. It was time. Without hesitation, Layla raised her hand, and the first man in her path lunged forward. But before he could reach her, the air around them seemed to crackle. Layla's power surged and, with a single forceful movement, she sent him flying across the room, his body slamming against the far wall with a sickening thud. The others hesitated, taken aback by her strength, but it was too late. They had already made the fatal mistake of underestimating her. The leader's calm expression faltered for the first time as he watched his men fall. His control was slipping, and he knew it. But he didn't move. Instead, he watched Layla with a look that could have been pity. "Do you really think this is what you want, Layla?" he asked, his voice laced with contempt. "Do you think you'll win by destroying everything I've built? What will you have left after that?" "Nothing." Layla's eyes burned with a fierce resolve. "I've already lost everything. There's nothing left to take from me." With that, she moved again, faster than any of them could react, her hand sweeping through the air, sending another attacker crashing to the ground. One by one, they fell, their weapons no match for the raw, untamable force she wielded. When the last of the men had been neutralized, the leader was left standing alone, his face a mask of frustration and rage. He had underestimated her. And now, it was too late. Layla stepped closer, her heart steady as she locked eyes with him. This was the moment. The culmination of everything. "You've been hiding behind your empire for too long," she said, her voice cold and final. "You thought you could control me. You thought you could control everyone. But you can't." The leader took a step back, his face now twisted with anger. "You're a fool, Layla. You can't win. The system is too strong. You can't break it." "I don't need to break it," she replied, her eyes never leaving his. "I'm going to destroy it." With that, Layla raised her hand one final time, and the room seemed to shake as the power within her surged, uncontrollable and raw. A wave of energy burst forth, sending the leader sprawling to the ground as the room trembled. For a moment, everything was silent. The monitors flickered and died, the walls groaned under the strain. And then, with a final crack, the entire facility went dark. Layla stood alone in the ruins, the weight of what she had done settling over her like a heavy blanket. She had destroyed everything that had been built on lies, manipulation, and control. The network that had enslaved her, the people who had used her as a pawn, were no more. But as she looked around at the destruction, a strange emptiness filled her. She had won, but at what cost? She had taken everything down, but now she had to rebuild. She wasn't sure what that would look like, but she knew one thing for certain: she would no longer be controlled. The world would never forget her name. And now, she had the power to shape it. As Layla turned to leave, her footsteps echoing in the silence, she felt the lingering pull of the past. The shadows were still there, lurking at the edges of her consciousness, reminding her of what she had lost. But she wasn't afraid anymore. The storm had passed, and the world was waiting for her to decide what came next. The streets were quieter now. The roar of the city that had once been a constant presence in Layla's life seemed to have softened, as though the entire world was holding its breath. There were no more shadows lurking in every corner, no more whispered threats in the dark. Layla stood at the edge of the balcony, looking out over the city she had fought to reclaim. The night stretched out before her, peaceful and still. But even as she stood there, she knew the world would never be the same. She had burned everything to the ground, but from the ashes, she would build something new. Layla stood in front of the window, her silhouette framed by the soft glow of the city lights below. The room behind her was filled with the quiet hum of life returning to normal, but her mind was far away. The victory over the network, The collapse of the empire that had controlled her life had been satisfying. But it had come with a price. The battle had changed her. She wasn't the same woman who had once cowered in the shadows, afraid of her own power. But as the dust settled, and she stood in the ruins of everything, there was a weight in her chest. She had burned bridges. She had destroyed the systems of control that had kept her, and so, many others, enslaved for far too long. But now, as she stood on the precipice of a new world, she wasn't sure what to do next. The city, the heart of the empire that had once used fear and power to govern, was beginning to stir. People were waking up, realizing that the chains that had bound them had been broken. There was a new energy in the air, one filled with possibility, but that didn't mean it would be easy. There was still work to be done. Layla knew that. The people who had been a part of the network weren't just going to disappear. They had allies, influence, and the scars of years of corruption to use against her. But she wasn't afraid. She was the one in control now. Kieran's voice broke through her thoughts as he entered the room, his footsteps soft on the polished floor. He looked at her, his expression unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something that had always been there. "You did it," he said quietly, almost like a question. Layla turned to him, a faint smile curling at the corners of her lips. "We did it," she corrected. Kieran nodded, stepping closer. "What now?" She paused, her eyes searching the horizon. The city spread out before her, a sprawling landscape of hope and despair, of memories and dreams. It was a world on the edge of change, and Layla knew that the revolution she had started was only the beginning. "I don't know yet," she admitted, her voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. "But I do know one thing. There's a lot of rebuilding to do, and I'm going to make sure I'm part of it." Kieran watched her closely, sensing the weight of the decision that rested on her shoulders. "You're not going to do this alone, are you?" he asked. Layla shook her head slowly. "No, I can't. But I'll be the one leading it. The world needs to remember that they're not powerless, that there's more to life than just following the rules of the ones who think they own everything. I'll make sure they remember." Kieran smiled faintly, though his eyes still carried a certain sadness. "You've come a long way, Layla. But the fight isn't over. The hardest part is still ahead." Layla stood silently for a moment, her gaze lingering on the dark city below. She could hear the faint sounds of life, a bus honking in the distance, the soft hum of conversations that filled the streets. But there was something else too, something quieter, something that only she could hear. The weight of responsibility, the power that she had unlocked, was something she couldn't ignore anymore. It wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't just about destroying the past. It was about creating something new, something better. She had learned that power came at a price, and even though the world was hers to shape, she understood now that true power wasn't in control. It was in the ability to lead, to guide, and to build something that could endure beyond the storms that would inevitably come. As the first rays of sunlight began to break through the horizon, Layla turned to face Kieran. "We're just getting started," she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. Kieran smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Then let's make sure we don't fail." With that, they both stepped toward the door, their shadows long against the light of a new day. The door shut softly behind them, and as they made their way down the dark corridors, Layla's thoughts swirled. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. There were still people out there who would stop at nothing to regain control. But Layla had already won something far more important: her freedom. The world was changing, and she was at the center of it all. And the world would remember her name. The city stretched out before her as Layla took her first steps into a new world. The path ahead would be uncertain, filled with both danger and opportunity. But she was ready. The revolution had begun, and she would lead it. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you loved it, and you would love for more, Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you loved it, and you would love for more, kindly comment below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon for more amazing content. Drop a comment with your favorite moment, and I'll see you in the next one.